The palace square was already full when the morning sun rose higher and light touched the old stone ground, and tourists moved slowly with phones in their hands while voices echoed softly through the open space. And at the center of the square stood a royal guard named Adam, who had been standing in the same place for years without showing any feeling, and his uniform was clean and dark and pressed perfectly, and his boots were polished until they reflected the sky, and Adam's face was calm and still like a carved statue, and people often wondered how he could stand for so long without blinking, and Adam did not wonder about it anymore because this duty had become part of his life, and he had learned to ignore the noise, the laughter, the whispers, and the careless behavior of strangers, and his job was simple and serious at the same time because he was there to protect something far greater than himself. And while the tourists admired the palace gates behind him, they rarely thought about the weight of responsibility that rested on the man standing in front of them. And Adam remembered the day he was chosen for this position when he was younger and nervous but proud, and he remembered the words spoken to him about discipline, respect, and control, and those words stayed with him every single day he stood guard. And among the tourists that morning was a young man named Leo who was not interested in history or duty, and Leo cared more about attention and excitement, and he held his phone in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, and he laughed loudly with his friends while recording himself. And Leo believed that moments were only valuable if people online reacted to them, and he had seen videos of guards before and thought they were easy targets for jokes, and his friends stood near him smiling nervously because they sensed trouble but did not speak strongly enough to stop him. And Leo stepped closer to Adam while pointing the camera toward the guard's face. And Adam noticed the movement without turning his head because awareness was part of his training, and Leo whispered something to the camera and smiled as if the world was watching only him. And then he lifted his coffee cup and flicked his wrist carelessly, and the warm coffee splashed across Adam's uniform and stained the dark fabric, and the sound of laughter stopped suddenly as silence filled the square, and people froze where they stood because no one expected such behavior, and the smell of coffee spread in the air while drops slid slowly down the buttons of Adam's uniform, and Leo laughed again trying to make the moment seem harmless, and he spoke loudly saying it was only a joke, and Adam did not react immediately, which confused Leo because he expected shouting or anger, and instead Adam remained still for a brief moment while observing everything around him. And the guard's training guided his thoughts as he assessed the situation calmly, and Adam slowly turned his eyes toward Leo for the first time that day, and that single movement caused a wave of unease among the people watching, and Leo felt his smile fade as the guard's steady gaze met his own, and it was not a look of rage but a look of authority and control, and Leo suddenly felt smaller than before even though nothing physical had happened yet. And Adam raised his hand in a controlled and deliberate motion that made the nearby tourists step back without realizing why, and the square felt heavier as if the air itself had changed, and Adam spoke in a low and clear voice asking Leo to remain where he was, and Leo's heart beat faster as he realized that the situation had slipped beyond his control, and he tried to speak but his voice did not come out as confidently as before, and his friends looked away pretending they were not involved, and Adam noticed their behavior but kept his focus on Leo. And Adam's mind returned briefly to his training where he learned that respect for the uniform was not personal pride but protection of order, and he remembered that actions always carried consequences even when meant as jokes, and Leo shifted his weight from one foot to the other feeling exposed as more eyes turned toward him, and the phone in his hand continued recording capturing his growing fear, and Adam took a small step forward which felt much larger to those watching, and the crowd murmured quietly as they realized something serious was unfolding. And Leo's confidence drained as he finally understood that the guard was not a performer or a prop but a protector with responsibility, and Adam's presence filled the space between them without any rush or aggression, and Leo swallowed hard realizing that his search for attention had led him into a moment he could not edit or undo, and the palace gates behind Adam stood tall and silent as witnesses to what was about to happen next, and in that moment Leo knew that this was no longer a prank and that his actions had awakened a response far greater than laughter, and the silence that followed felt louder than any shout, and everyone waited to see what the guard would do next. The silence in the palace square stretched longer than anyone expected, and Leo felt every second press against his chest as Adam stood in front of him without raising his voice or changing his calm posture, and the guard's presence alone was enough to draw attention from every corner of the square, and tourists who were moments ago laughing now stood quietly with phones lowered. And Leo's friends slowly stepped back creating distance as if space could erase their involvement, and Adam glanced briefly toward the palace entrance as if signaling without words, and within moments another guard named Mark appeared near the gate moving with the same controlled calm, and Mark positioned himself nearby without touching Leo or speaking loudly, and the situation remained peaceful but firm, and Adam spoke again asking Leo to lower his phone and keep his hands visible, and Leo obeyed quickly because his confidence had fully disappeared, and his hand shook slightly as he lowered the device. Realizing the recording was still running, and the camera captured his nervous breathing and the guard's steady stance, and Adam noticed the coffee stain on his uniform but made no effort to clean it because appearances mattered less than discipline, and he asked Leo for identification in a clear respectful tone, and Leo hesitated before reaching into his pocket but moved slowly when Adam nodded allowing him to proceed, and Leo handed over his identification while explaining that it was meant to be a joke and that he did not mean harm. And Adam listened without interruption because listening was also part of control, and he explained calmly that the palace grounds were a place of respect and order, and that actions had meaning even when intention was careless, and Leo nodded repeatedly feeling regret settle deep inside him, and nearby tourists whispered among themselves realizing that this moment was becoming a lesson rather than a punishment, and Mark stood watch ensuring no one interfered while Adam continued addressing Leo. And Adam told him that mocking duty weakened trust, and that trust was something earned through respect. And Leo looked down at the stone ground ashamed because no one had ever spoken to him with such quiet authority. And Adam handed back the identification and informed Leo that he would be escorted away from the square for questioning by officials responsible for visitor conduct. And Leo's heart sank because the situation was no longer something he could laugh off online, and his friends avoided eye contact pretending to check their phones. And Adam noticed their behavior but chose not to address them because responsibility belonged to the one who acted, and the walk toward the palace side entrance felt long, even though it was only a few steps, and people moved aside silently creating a clear path, and Leo felt every gaze follow him as he walked beside Mark. And Adam returned to his position once Leo was guided away showing no sign of triumph or anger, and the crowd slowly resumed movement but the energy of the square had changed. And tourists spoke more softly and kept a respectful distance, and some looked at Adam with new understanding realizing the strength behind his stillness, and Leo was guided into a quiet room near the entrance where officials waited, and he sat down feeling smaller than he had ever felt before, and the officials spoke calmly, asking him to explain what happened and why he thought it was acceptable, and Leo struggled to explain because the words sounded foolish even to him, and he admitted that he wanted attention and reactions. And the officials listened and reminded him that public spaces carried shared responsibility, and Leo nodded realizing that moments made for laughs could carry lasting impact. And after some time he was informed that he would be escorted out of the palace grounds and that his behavior would be reported to authorities responsible for visitor regulations, and Leo accepted this quietly because he knew arguing would only deepen his mistake. And as he was escorted out, he glanced back once more toward the square, and saw Adam standing exactly where he had been before as if nothing had changed. And yet, everything had changed for Leo, and he realized that the guard's strength was not in reaction but in restraint, and that discipline was more powerful than any joke. And outside the palace walls Leo's phone buzzed with notifications but he did not check them. And for the first time he felt no desire to post or explain himself online, and instead he felt the weight of the lesson settling in his thoughts. And back in the square tourists resumed their visits with a quieter respect, and Adam remained still guarding the gate with the same calm presence, and the coffee stain dried on his uniform becoming a reminder not of disrespect but of order maintained without force, and the palace stood unchanged while one person left carrying a story he would never forget, and the square returned to its steady rhythm while the meaning of the moment lingered in the air, and though no voices were raised and no harsh action was taken the lesson reached everyone watching. And the guard remained silent but his message was clear, and respect once broken demanded reflection, and control shown without anger carried the strongest impact, and the day continued but for Leo and many others nothing felt quite the same. Leo spent the rest of the day outside the palace grounds sitting alone on a bench near a quiet street while the noise of the city passed around him, and his phone rested in his hand but the screen remained dark because he did not feel ready to face what he had recorded. And his thoughts returned again and again to the moment when the guard looked at him without anger yet with complete control, and Leo realized that the silence of that look had shaken him more than any loud reaction ever could. And he replayed the scene in his mind, noticing details he had ignored before like the stillness of the square and the way people stepped back instinctively, and he remembered how confident he felt just minutes before and how quickly that confidence collapsed. and for the first time Leo questioned why he needed attention from strangers so badly. And he thought about how easily he had treated another person as an object rather than a human with duty and discipline. And as the afternoon light shifted, he finally opened his phone and watched the video he had recorded, and he saw his own smile before the action and the sudden fear after it, and the contrast made his chest feel heavy, and comments were already appearing online, but he scrolled past them without reading, and he understood that no explanation could remove what had already happened. And back at the palace, Adam continued his duty with the same calm presence he had always shown, and the stain on his uniform had been cleaned. During a brief shift change, but the memory of the moment stayed with him, and Adam reflected quietly on the event, not with frustration but with acceptance, because he knew that public duty often meant becoming a mirror for others to see their own behavior, and he remembered his training officer once saying that strength shown calmly could teach more than force ever would, and Adam felt that lesson proven once again. And tourists that afternoon approached the gates with more care, keeping distance and lowering their voices, and some watched Adam with a new sense of respect, as if they now understood the meaning behind his stillness. And one older man paused briefly and nodded at Adam before moving on, and Adam acknowledged it with the slightest movement of his eyes. And while the square returned to normal rhythm, the impact of the incident quietly spread among visitors through whispers and shared stories. And many spoke about how the guard handled the situation without raising his voice or showing aggression, and the story traveled not because of shock but because of discipline. And Leo eventually stood from the bench and walked slowly through the city streets, feeling disconnected from the excitement he once chased. And he passed cafes and crowds but felt no urge to join them, and instead he thought about respect and responsibility, which were ideas he had rarely considered before. And later that evening Leo returned to his hotel room and placed his phone on the table as if it carried weight, and he sat on the bed staring at the wall, replaying the guard's calm voice in his mind, and he realized that the lesson was not about punishment but about awareness, and that awareness now followed him everywhere. And he opened his phone again and made a decision that surprised even himself, and he deleted the video completely without posting an explanation or apology online, and the action felt quiet but meaningful. And he knew that some moments were meant to change the person experiencing them rather than entertain others. And as night fell, the palace lights illuminated the gates, and Adam completed his shift, handing over his position to another guard. And he walked away from the square with steady steps, blending back into ordinary life without ceremony. And yet his role in the day lingered unseen. And Leo lay awake that night, unable to sleep, because his mind kept returning to the idea that respect could be demanded without words. And he wondered how many moments in his life he had missed by chasing reactions instead of understanding. And the city outside continued its usual noise, but Leo felt quieter inside, and he knew that the experience would stay with him long after the trip ended. And back at the palace the next morning, the square welcomed a new wave of tourists, unaware of what had happened the day before. And Adam returned to his position once again, standing tall and still, as if nothing had ever disturbed the routine, and yet the invisible impact of the moment remained, carried by those who witnessed it. And Leo prepared to leave the city, carrying a story he would never share for attention but would remember as a turning point. And the palace stood unchanged while a person walked away, changed deeply, and the calm response of one guard continued to echo quietly through the actions of many, and the lesson moved forward without noise, waiting to shape what would come next. The final morning of Leo's trip arrived quietly, and he packed his bag without the excitement he once felt when traveling. And as he zipped the bag closed, he paused for a moment, feeling that this city had given him something more lasting than photos or videos. And outside the hotel the streets were busy, but Leo walked slowly, noticing details he had ignored before, like faces, movements, and the shared space people occupied together. And he found himself thinking again about the guard and the calm strength that had reshaped his understanding of respect. And before leaving the city, Leo decided to walk past the palace one last time, not to film or joke, but simply to observe. And he stood at a distance, blending into the crowd, while the familiar square opened before him. And Adam was there once again, standing in the same position with the same posture and focus. And nothing about the guard suggested that anything unusual had happened days before. And yet Leo felt the weight of memory return instantly, and he watched tourists move carefully and quietly, as if the place itself encouraged restraint. And a young child tugged at his parent's hand, asking about the guard, and the parent spoke softly, explaining the importance of duty. And Leo felt a small sense of hope, realizing that respect could be taught through example without force. And Adam noticed the crowd with trained awareness and saw Leo standing farther back, and their eyes met briefly without recognition or emotion. And Adam did not know Leo personally, nor did he need to, because his role was never about individuals but about presence. And Leo nodded slightly, not expecting acknowledgement, and Adam returned his gaze forward, continuing his duty. And in that simple exchange Leo felt closure without words, and he turned away from the square feeling lighter than before. And as he walked toward the train station, he reflected on how quickly careless actions could reveal deeper truths, and he understood now that responsibility did not belong only to those in uniform but to everyone who shared public space, and the memory of silence in the square returned to him not as fear but as clarity, and he promised himself quietly to be more aware of how his actions affected others. And meanwhile Adam completed another routine shift, observing faces, movements, and changes with quiet patience. And he felt no pride or regret about the incident, because duty was not measured by recognition, and his role was to maintain order through consistency and calm. And the palace gates behind him stood as symbols of continuity while people came and went with their own stories. And later that day, a group of visitors spoke respectfully about the guard sharing what they had heard from others. And the story continued to spread not as a scandal but as an example of dignity. And Adam remained still, allowing the meaning to exist without his involvement. And Leo boarded his train and watched the city fade through the window, carrying no souvenirs except understanding. And he realized that some lessons were meant to stay private, shaping behavior rather than image. And as the train moved forward, he closed his eyes, briefly feeling gratitude for a moment that changed him without harming anyone. And back at the palace, the square returned to its steady rhythm, with footsteps echoing lightly across stone. And Adam stood firm, as he always had, becoming once again part of the background for new visitors. And the incident faded from immediate memory, but its influence lingered quietly in changed behavior and softened voices. And days passed, and new faces arrived, unaware of what had occurred yet guided by the atmosphere of respect that remained. And Leo returned home, carrying the experience into his daily life, choosing thought over impulse and awareness over attention. And Adam continued his service day after day, embodying calm authority without needing acknowledgement, and the palace remained unchanged, while people moved through it learning lessons they might never name. And the story ended not with punishment or drama but with understanding shared through silence, and respect restored itself without force, leaving behind a reminder that control shown with calm carried the greatest strength. And the world continued forward, shaped subtly by a moment when restraint spoke louder than reaction. And the square stood open, welcoming all who entered with the quiet expectation of dignity.